don't know about you guys, but for the last few weeks, I've kind of just been waiting for DICE and EA to announce what they're doing in the June update for Battlefield 5. I've not played the game all that much because there's been nothing of interest really happening with it. However, during this time, some more information via data mining has kind of shone some light on what could be coming in the next few weeks, and we're going to take a look at that today, and it kind of leads into where DICE was going before they cancelled support for the game. But now is a great time to subscribe to the channel if you're not already. All that brand new Battlefield 5 content is on the horizon, and a big thanks to everyone who has subscribed recently. It's great to see so many new names down in the comments section. Okay, so before we get into all of this, let me just remind you that anything we do discuss, from data mines or people looking through the files, that's not official information, and therefore we've got to take it with a pinch of salt because it could not turn out to happen. There's no way to confirm or deny any of this, and only that will come when the trailer is revealed for the June update in Battlefield 5. But looking at what has been unearthed, I think there's definitely a chance that at least some of this content might make it into the final update, although as I say, we can't really be sure. First, let's start off with perhaps the most telling of finds, the references to more America versus Germany assets. Before the cancellation of support, I think most of us in the community thought DICE would either move over to the Eastern Front for their next theatre of war, or they'd go back to Western Europe for the Allied invasion. Now, Temporyal, our resident data miner, he has found more evidence to suggest that we were heading back to Western Europe, with information uncovered about 4 different US plane variants that would have fitted right into that setting. One pair of variants is the P-51D and P-51K Mustang fighters, and then we also have the A-20 bomber and the P-70 night fighter. We'll start with the Mustangs. The P-51K was a plane built almost completely identical to the P-51D, apart from it had a slightly different propeller, and many of them were then lend-leased to the British for use by the RAF. Of course, the Mustang is an American fighter. Most of them were retained for use by the American Air Force, but perhaps DICE was looking to have a British Mustang and an American Mustang in the game, with the American one being the P-51D, and that was perhaps the definitive version of the plane. And then the A-20 Havoc bomber and the P-70 night fighter, which is a variant of the A-20, both of those saw use by the Americans in the European theatre, and the A-20s also featured in the Pacific theatre. Initially, the A-20s were flown in combat missions with RAF units, perhaps accompanied by P-51 Mustangs, which were designed to fly at high altitudes to escort the bombers, and also featured larger fuel tanks so they could make the longer trips from England, across the English Channel, and then into enemy territory over mainland Europe. But the inclusion of an A-70 night fighter variant, that might well suggest that DICE was exploring adding a nighttime map to Battlefield 5. And that also kind of ties in with the M3 IR sniper carbine. Why would you add an infrared carbine built for use at night and then not have a night map in the game? So maybe there's something to that theory there. Then, moving on from planes, we're going to take a more in-depth look at 2 new vehicles that have been found in the past and have recently been updated in the files. We have the M8 Greyhound for the Americans and the Sonderkraft Fahrzeug 234, or the Puma, for the Germans. And I'm going to call it the Puma because saying Sonderkraft Fahrzeug is really fun to say, but I still don't know if I'm quite saying it correctly. And I'm definitely saying it with an English accent because I don't want to do a German one and get it really, really wrong. But both of these did get updated code in update 6.6, and we now have a little bit of a look at what would have been some of their loadout options. This could of course just be leftover work before the team decided to halt production on Battlefield 5 and move on, or it could be work that's not quite finished and will be finished in the next update, with these things then added to the game, but we're not 100% sure. But it does again indicate that DICE was working towards a US versus Germany expansion for Battlefield 5, and possibly that could have been Chapter 7 or Chapter 8, but of course we're never going to know. Both of these vehicles were designed for reconnaissance and light engagement roles, using speed to outmaneuver an enemy whilst also being lightly armoured. So for the Puma, there is one upgrade option to enable a medium 50mm anti-tank cannon, giving it a bit more firepower against American tanks like the Sherman, and we can also assume that DICE would have worked to add more American tanks to the European maps, perhaps a heavier Sherman alternative. There is also mention of an AA shell for the Puma as well. And then for the M8 Greyhound, an upgrade features quad 50 cal machine guns, effective against enemy aircraft for dealing greater damage. Now both of these vehicles would have filled the role of a lighter armed vehicle for the US and Germans, set in mainland Europe after the Normandy beach landings. Think of something that's faster and more mobile than the Staghound or the Panzer 38T that's already in the game, but with slightly less armour, and then you're kind of along the right sort of lines there. And then in even more evidence of an expansion of the American faction for Battlefield 5, we have a bunch of additional character names that have been found in the files. When the Pacific launched, one of the main pieces of feedback was that there wasn't enough characters for the Americans and the Japanese to set up a bunch of different soldiers with different clothing loadouts. The British and the Germans, they still have way more at this point, and you could create multiple different characters and easily switch them in and out. And you couldn't do that with the Americans and the Japanese. Each faction is still limited to 3 male and 3 female characters. However, Tempoyal has discovered more characters were intended to be added, or may still be added, with this final update. The American list is as follows: Roy, Duncan, Sam, Earl, Walter, Raymond, and Thomas for the males, and then Phyllis, Rita, Pauline, Lois, Gloria, Barbara, and Ruth on the female side. And then the Japanese, they also got 2 more names, Shigeru and Hiroko. Now, with that many American names being present in the files, it's fair to assume that DICE wasn't only answering the call to add more character options for the Americans in the Pacific, but they were probably bolstering the character count to enable more options for a return to Europe with the same faction. And that theory is backed up by the fact that the Japanese army only got 2 more names, signalling an end of their involvement in future content, and then that faction just being held in the Pacific content. And you might remember, a while back actually, a besieged cosmetic set coming out for the American faction. That certainly didn't have a place in the Pacific theatre. That's not the kind of clothing that American soldiers or Marines would have worn. So perhaps back then, before the launch of the Solomon Islands map, which is where this screenshot was taken, DICE was working towards a return to the European theatre, where this outfit, like the besieged one, would have fit in a hell of a lot better. So perhaps the planning was back then that they were going to go to the European theatre before they went over to the Eastern Front. And then something a little bit more strange, references to a Panzer IV turret bunker. Sounds a little bit strange, but this image on the screen right here shows what I'm talking about, although it's using a slightly different cannon. It's not from the Panzer IV, it's from a different one. I think it's the Panther tank, but apparently the Germans would install turrets of obsolete tanks into the ground and then use them as defensive cannons on strategic positions, and obviously that would massively increase their firepower in a certain location. Allied forces, they called these installations Tobruks, and that's kind of linked into the Libya setting of the new map. So the theory is that the Libya map, which is the only confirmed piece of content so far that we have for the June update, could have these tank turret installations on the map as a gameplay mechanic. And that would be really interesting, to say the least. That would be really cool, actually. And then, just to wrap up the video, a couple of unrelated pieces to the US versus Germany thing, but I thought I'd mention them because they're still quite interesting. First, references to a new game mode have been found in the files, a UI message for "you have advanced to the next weapon," and another "you have been demoted to X" were added with update 6.6, and those sound very much like they'd be for a Gunmaster game mode, which was last seen in Battlefield 4. I really enjoyed the Gunmaster game mode in Battlefield 3, not so much in Battlefield 4, but That might have been to do with the fact that the game had massively bad netcode issues when the game mode was admittedly quite popular, and that put me off, at least at the start of things. I wouldn't mind that game mode returning here for Battlefield 5, but I think at this stage, in this situation, with support being cancelled, I do think it's quite unlikely that we'll see a new game mode like Gunmaster, unless they're going to add it to the smaller maps in the game to make them more popular, I don't know. Or maybe it's another limited time game mode. Yay, fantastic. Moving on. Lastly, there will be a trailer for the June update. According to Jeff Braddock on Reddit, the trailer is going to showcase details of the content drop, and that includes weapons, gadgets, vehicles, yay, maps, and even more. So it seems like whatever is coming in the final update is worthy of being advertised with a trailer. And I've got to say that if you're going to make a trailer for that kind of stuff, it's going to have to be big enough to warrant it. So if there is that much content coming in the June update, it could be one of the biggest updates that Battlefield 5 has ever seen. So there you have it, a bunch of evidence to state that DICE might well have been going in the mainland Europe direction for their next theatre, rather than towards the East and the USSR. Whatever their plans were, we're never going to see them play out in Battlefield 5, but I think this last update coming soon is going to use a lot of what was worth saving from that work towards the next theatre, and it's going to be released as one final flourish before the team moves on to Battlefield 6. Leave me your thoughts down below in the comments section, and leave me a rating as well. It is always appreciated. And I'll catch you all in the next one.